Hello, and welcome to Law Talk. My name is John Celebrezze, and I'm the co-founder of the Celebrezze-Zangi Community Legal Education Project, as we call it, CZ-CLEP for short. Our organization provides continuing education about the judiciary and legislature to attorneys, judges, government officials, and the general public. As a career educator, I recognize early on how important legal matters are and how they impact our lives. I am the nephew of the late Anthony J. Celebrezze, who was the popular 5-term mayor of Cleveland and a member of President Kennedy's cabinets. As a tribute to his lifetime commitment to the legal process, we dedicate this show.
John's guest today is Jennifer Brunner. Working as a legislative counsel for the Ohio Secretary of State's office, she worked with the Ohio General Assembly to improve fairness, openness, and accountability in campaign finance and election law. In 2000, Jennifer returned to public service when she was elected as judge to Franklin County Common Pleas Court. As a judge, she is credited with the creation of the Treatment in Essentials to Success, or TIES program, more commonly called Drug Court. In 2006, Jennifer was elected Ohio Secretary of State. During the 2008 presidential election, which Ohio was a key battleground state, Jennifer defended Ohioans' voting rights in numerous cases in both state and federal court, eventually winning the United States Supreme Court to protect voters and their ballots from being targeted for election challenges by partisan operatives. Her efforts earned her a Profile and Courage Award from the John F. Kennedy Presidential Library and Museum. Today, Jennifer has returned to private practice as partner at Brunner & Quinn, where she practices in areas of election law along with general litigation.
Well, Jennifer, thank you for being my guest on Law Talk today.
I'm glad to be here,
And
John.
welcome to Wadsworth, Ohio. We were just reminiscing here. I haven't seen you in 5 years, right?
I know, and we both look, well, the same as 5 years ago.
Well, I agree with you on that. You know, I was getting ready for the show today. I put some questions together for you so we can kind of work through this in an orderly fashion. But I was thinking about you, and you have been involved with elections for a long, long time, haven't you?
I have, ever since I graduated from law school.
Okay. We know you're about 35, so the Secretary of State that you once worked for, you were Secretary of State, obviously.
Correct.
Was who?
Sherrod Brown, who's now our U.S. Senator.
That's right. Okay, so you worked in Sherrod's office, and you were the legislative consult.
Correct.
At one time you worked with the legislature.
Yes, that was my first job out of law school, and I worked there from 83 to 87. I'm dating myself now. And it was a great experience, learned a lot, and when I became Secretary of State, I actually brought institutional memory with me back into the office.
That's right. And you became Secretary of State in the year 2006. That you won in 2006 yes. And had 4 years as our Secretary of State. Lots of things have gone on in the election business, and it's pretty newsworthy on a regular basis, it seems. And I have my first question for you. I think is relevant. What is the current state of Ohio law regarding photo identification at the polls?
Okay, right now, what's in the law? You hear a lot about proposals, but any changes are not yet adopted by the legislature. As of, well, now we're here in the month of May. So right now you can have government-issued photo ID, such as a driver's license or an ID card, a military ID. You also could use a utility bill, a bank statement, a pay stub, or an other government document.
So as of today, the law as of today, I mean, you're not really required to have a photo ID.
Correct.
I see.
And in addition, if you don't have any of those forms of ID, you can still vote a provisional ballot, and as long as you submit the last 4 digits of your Social Security number, you don't have to go back and provide additional ID after the election. As long as they can verify your signature, which you sign the poll book,
sure.
Your name, and your the last 4 digits of your Social Security number, that ballot's going to count. It just won't be counted election night. It'll be counted around sometime after 10 days after the election.
To the letter of the law, you could still vote without a photo ID today. Is that what you're saying?
You absolutely could vote without a photo ID, and if you didn't have any form of ID, you could still vote.
Okay, why then, there seems to be a little controversy about the photo ID. why would there be a faction of people that would object to this, Jennifer? I mean,
well, the issue is if that's the only method by which you can identify yourself to be able to vote a ballot, what happens if you lose your ID? And should you be denied the right to vote if you don't have that ID with you? It's so easy sometimes. I've actually lost my ID by forgetting to put it away in the airport. And then, we really were in a dickens of a time trying to figure out how to get me back through the airport to get back home. But, it's easy for somebody to slip their ID into the back of their jeans pocket and then take their blue jeans and put them in the closet, and the next thing they know, they get to vote, and it's 7:25 and the polls close at 7:30, and they say, oh my word, where's my ID? And then how would that really be fair to deny somebody the right to vote on that when they're still signing the poll book, that signature is still being compared with the signature on file with the Board of Elections, because that always was a very strong form of identification and still will be. So we just have to be reasonable about this.
I see. Okay. Well, now we know. Photo ID is out there as maybe proposed law, but as we speak, it is not the law. And it does make sense when you think about it.
Sure, it's an acceptable form of identification. It's a good form of identification, but it's not the only, and it's not the sole required form.
My mother never drove a car, and my father always did drive to the point that he surrendered his driver's license. And to be honest with you, I don't know if they had a photo ID at that point in their life when you come to think of it.
Well, and the difficult thing is if you think about, if you've ever had kids that have to go get their driver's license, then, or even just the state ID card, you have to have two acceptable forms of identification to be able to get the photo ID, and then just the regular ID, not the driver's license, is $8.50. So if you have someone who's, very mobile, doesn't have steady housing, it's not always as easy as you would think it would be. You think you got the right IDs, you show up at the deputy registrar or the Bureau of Motor Vehicles, and all of a sudden you don't have the right form of ID. It's a hardship for some people.
Absentee voting, absentee ballots, that's for everybody now, right? I mean, it used to be you had to be a senior citizen to
or have a disability or certified that you're going to be out of town. But now it's what some people refer to as no fault absentee voting. Basically, you don't have to give a reason for why you want to vote before the election, and you can do it by mail, the typical way it's always been done, or you can show up at the Board of Elections. In the larger counties, sometimes they'll have a satellite location instead of the board because they want easier parking. But it's very convenient for people. It's what people, I think people like choices, and you give them a choice of what works for them, they're a lot happier and they're more likely to participate.
So an absentee ballot, you contact your Board of Elections, they send you an application, ultimately to your mailbox a ballot comes, correct?
Yes, and even to apply for the absentee ballot, I don't mean to jump in, but
no, that's okay.
But you can actually go online and you can download an absentee ballot application. If you're in the military, the application that the military gives you can serve for both registration and for requesting an absentee ballot. Even if you don't have the application, as long as you write a letter and you have all the correct information that you're supposed to have to request that ballot, the Board of Elections can send you a ballot. You just can't do it by phone.
Okay, so when it comes for that given election, it's got the issues and the candidates on it. You appropriately mark that in your home, correct?
Correct.
Or wherever you're at. You put it in the mail and send it back?
Right.
That's it?
You can have, if you have an issue with money for postage, a relative can drop it off at the Board of Elections. Okay. You can drop it off at the board. But what a lot of people like about absentee voting by mail is that they can take their time, they don't feel rushed. If they're internet proficient, they can go on and they can look at the websites of all the candidates and really do their due diligence and explore what they need to know about the candidates. And then some families sit around the kitchen table and they actually discuss the candidates, and then everybody votes their own way.
Oh, okay. All right, now, absentee, you touched on it, but if you would be so kind to go back, but an absentee ballot and a provisional ballot are different, correct?
Correct. The absentee ballot is a regular ballot, and depending upon what county you live in, some counties there's the touchscreen machine, and it's all contained in the machine. Other counties you vote on a paper ballot, like Cuyahoga, and you actually put it into a scanner, And so that paper ballot is what someone who votes by mail gets when they vote. In person, sometimes there may be a machine. Now, the difference is so absentee ballots are voted before the election.
Okay.
But on election day, we have this creature called a provisional ballot, which I call a just-in-case ballot.
All right.
So if there's a discrepancy, and it looks like you belong in that precinct, but for some reason your name's not on the rolls.
Okay.
And the one thing I should caution is that if a poll worker says to you, you're not in the right precinct, you're supposed to be over here at a different precinct, you should definitely go to that precinct, because if you vote in the wrong precinct, your ballot doesn't count the way Ohio law is now. So if there's some kind of a problem, you vote a provisional ballot. It is kept in an identification envelope, but the secrecy of that ballot is maintained.
Okay.
Then they look at the outside envelope, and the Board of Elections will verify that you are eligible to vote, and that then is counted in the second counting of the ballots, which is the official canvass,
Sure.
between 11 and 15 days after the election.
So it would be possible, Jennifer, in a real close election, that on election night we think Mr. Smith is the winner, but actually Mr. Jones would have more provisionals, counting them a couple weeks later, and still win.
That is very possible, and that's why it was my goal as Secretary of State, and I know it's Secretary Husted's goal, to lower the number of provisional ballots so that we don't have that kind of a situation. We have more certainty on
Sure,
election night.
sure.
And plus we know that provisional ballots, they cause people a little bit of anxiety because they're worried about, well, did my
yeah,
vote
sure.
count or not? And there is a provisional ballot hotline you can call at the Secretary of State's office right after the election. And then also it's a lot more of administrative time and expense for the boards of elections as well.
Okay, another issue, the issue of language minorities has come up, to be provided with oral or written assistance. Seems to make the news at election time, which I think it has lately. This all has to do with bilingual balloting. Is there a federal mandate, Jennifer, to accommodate folks that speak another language?
Sure. I think the most recent example that we've all seen is in Cuyahoga County. There's the Voting Rights Act that has a specific section in it that says if someone is an American citizen but they were educated in a school where predominantly the language is not English, such as in Puerto Rico, they call it an American flag school,
Okay.
then if they have difficulty with English, they should be accommodated. And so what occurred last year with the Justice Department was they had been investigating or actually just trying to gather information on the numbers of limited English proficiency voters, especially of Puerto Rican descent, in Cuyahoga County. The number was such that it was significant enough that Cuyahoga needed to go to a bilingual ballot.
Okay.
And we were able to work out a consent decree with the Justice Department where we were able to phase it in so that not only the voters but the boards of elections could get used to that.
Sure.
And cost-wise implement it in a very orderly fashion. And it's worked well in the community. And in addition to that, it's not just the ballot, but it's also having poll workers who can speak more than one language,
Right.
who can provide real assistance to voters. And I can think of one attorney, Jose Feliciano in Cleveland, who remembers his mother never really being able to speak English all
Sure,
that well,
sure.
because a lot of people say, well, why don't they just learn English when they get here? But part of the problem is sometimes as they're trying to speak in English, there are people who will make fun of them, and you know how it feels to you that
Absolutely.
if somebody makes fun of you trying something
right.
new, you're going to
That's
pull
right.
back. And so his father would always go with his mother and help her understand the ballot, because Jose was born in Puerto Rico but came here when he was a young child.
I see.
So it's one of those things where it's really easy for us to sort of just throw down the gauntlet and say, they're here, why don't they learn English? But on the other hand, if you were in a foreign country and you were trying to speak that language and you were having a difficult
Now you'd
time,
understand.
and especially if you had some limited education or limited opportunities,
Sure.
It's just not as easy as what it looks.
Yeah,
And this is America.
that's right. That's exactly right. The melting pot, we came from all over. So in certain locations, over a period of time, it's come phased in that where the numbers require it, now Cuyahoga County being an example, there are bilingual ballots available.
Right, and it's
Okay.
likely with the results of the next census that there may be more counties
Sure,
in Ohio.
sure.
And what's so unusual for us in Ohio, we're sort of, we just the Midwest, the heartland, and we're Chevrolet, mom, apple pie. But our populations are changing, and this is not anything unusual for other states, even Illinois, California, Arizona, New Mexico.
Sure.
So this is just Ohio's changing.
Yeah, okay. Another hot topic, Jennifer, that is always a hot topic, but I think there's been some changes. Campaign contributions are regulated by Ohio and federal law, of course. Can you explain to our viewers about certain recent changes, maybe regarding contributions by corporations and unions?
Well, there's a U.S. Supreme Court decision called Citizens United that was issued by the court in January, the U.S. Supreme Court, in January of 2010.
Okay, so it's just been a year.
It's pretty recent. It's been a little over a year. And what it essentially says is that for the purposes of speaking freely for or against a candidate, not in conjunction with that candidate, but independently about that candidate, that corporations have the status of persons like you and me. Now, the public polling showed right after this was issued that about 80% of the American public was not happy with this decision.
Yeah.
What you saw in the 2010 campaigns were the use of things called super PACs or super fund PACs, where they filed at the federal level, but they participated in federal, state, and local elections.
I see.
And so the amount of disclosure was very limited, and government hasn't really been able to keep up quickly enough in regulating this so that it's more transparent, so that we can see who's actually speaking here and who's involved. Now, before I left office as Secretary of State, because our legislature had not been able to reach any kind of accord, I filed rules, and they're in effect now, that do require disclosure when corporations participate in this type of campaigning.
Okay.
And there's also some limitations on if they're owned greater than 20% by foreign investors, or if within the last year they got a state contract. We don't want them making these kind of expenditures, because why should our tax dollars go to fund a campaign?
Makes sense. I could remember various parts of my life, various campaigns that I worked on personally. That it was pretty much, corporate check is given as a contribution, give it back. But that's not the case now. That's a huge change.
It's a change in that it still would follow if a corporation gave a candidate a check and it was not an LLC, which is treated more like a partnership.
Yeah.
The candidate would need to give it back. But if the corporation says, I'm not talking to the candidate, I'm not talking to anybody, but I have viewpoints I want to get out there, and I am going to put my money down to speak my piece, now they're allowed to do it, even if it says, don't vote for Joe Smith or do vote for Shirley Jones.
I see. Pretty big change.
It's a very big change.
And we are learning to live with this. We're going through growing pains, so to speak. It's been a year. Is it up for discussion, or do you look for it to be what it is?
Well, I like to say that I think this is going to eventually go the way of the Dred Scott decision.
Okay.
And the reason I say this is because this is corporate interests that are tipping the scale way too much.
I see.
And I think just like you saw the Dred Scott decision that was very racist in its viewpoint, I think that you're going to see that the views of the American public will eventually prevail here. And it's unfortunate that the court really stepped outside of its bounds to even get to this issue. This was a sub-issue in a case that was already being argued before it, and Chief Justice Roberts heard the potential for this issue and took an unprecedented step and asked the parties to submit additional briefs on this particular issue and come back and argue it again. And the Supreme Court usually deals with issues that are called ripe for review,
right,
and they don't try to pick up some ancillary issue to try to create new policy. It's really the job of the Congress.
Yeah, I'm going to teach you that in law school.
Right, to make the policy. And the reason that the court, the court's decisions are organic in a way that they start to reflect the changes in what's going on in the population of the country, how technology changes things, and
Sure.
so they sort of move the law along. But in this case, the law was forced to move along to a place where I really don't think the American public was very happy to see it go.
All right. Well, Jennifer, it looks like Ohioans might be seeing considerable election reform based upon a few bills that are now working their way through the General Assembly. Early voting.
Well, it's really absentee voting, and so the idea of early voting is what's happened when we didn't limit or restrict who could vote absentee. So you really have early voting by mail, which is
Yeah.
traditional absentee voting.
Okay.
You have early voting in person, which is basically absentee voting in person. So there's
I see.
right now the period of absentee voting is 35 days before the election, but if you're military or overseas, those ballots have to be ready 45 days before the election. So some of the difficulty for boards of elections is that they have to be staffing so that as people come in to vote in person at the Board of Elections, while they're mailing out absentee ballots, while they're preparing all the packets
Sure.
for all the precincts all over.
People are
and
literally
training-
walking through the door.
Right, and they're training poll workers, they're answering calls from the public, they're cleaning up their voter registration lists at 30 days before the election. So there's discussion about shortening that period of the in-person early voting, but leaving absentee at pretty close to 35 days.
I see. Okay. Absentee, I mean, traditionally I saw it as, like we talked before, it comes in the mail, you send it in. I mean, and
Right.
of course the roots of the thing go back to folks that were in the military or whatever had to send it in. I mean, they weren't
Right.
home. College students, I think, voted absentee. But what would stop anybody under early voting to just walk down to the Board of Elections?
Well, as long as they're registered to vote,
Yeah.
they can vote in that election, and they can vote early without giving
So, I mean,
any reason.
they don't have to do the application thing. They can walk through the front door of the Board of Elections
Right.
if they're in the window.
They fill out what they do is they essentially fill out that application right then and there at the board.
On the spot.
Then they're given a ballot for their correct precinct, and then they vote right there at the Board of Elections. See, the controversy in 2008 was the fact that the cutoff for voter registration is 30 days before the election.
I see.
But early voting was starting 35 days before. So you had this
Oh.
overlap where you had a week where somebody could literally come in during that week period. They could register to vote.
Right.
And then they could say, I would like an absentee ballot application,
then.
and they'd want to vote absentee right then and there. And the issue was, how do we prevent voter fraud? So this was a law that got handed to me. It was a legislature that didn't pay attention to how the right hand
Sure.
affected the left hand. And so we told the Board of Elections, with the power that I had, that you cannot let someone vote on a machine. They have to vote a paper ballot that goes into a secrecy envelope, that goes into an ID envelope, and you don't open that envelope until you have verified that they in fact are
Kind
eligible
of like
to
a
vote.
provisional ballot. I mean,
Sure,
yeah,
sure.
I see. So that's how you
but it
dealt
was
with
for
it.
that 5-day to 7-day overlap period, and it's what has, I don't know how the term came about, but it was dubbed Golden Week.
I see.
So some of the proposals are to actually shorten that in-person period and take the by mail period for
Yeah.
if you're in the States to 28
I
days.
gotcha.
So you've got time to make sure your rolls are clean, your voter rolls are clean. You're accurately sending out an absentee ballot to someone who should have one, and then for people who show up to vote, we already know whether they're eligible or not.
The state of the law right now, though, Jennifer, if I wanted to early vote, okay, which means I'm exercising my right as to absentee vote,
Right.
but I'm bringing myself to the front, right down to the Board of Elections here. What's the window again? I mean, Election Day is date certain, November 2nd. How many days out?
35.
35.
35.
And that's what it is right
That's what it is right now.
Okay. Now, the 30 days has to do with the processing of the traditional
Close of registration.
Oh, I see.
So to be eligible
okay.
to vote in, let's say, the
On November 2nd,
right.
you have to be registered by October 2nd.
right,
Okay. I see. All right, is
or
this
October 3rd.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Is this I alluded to the fact that the legislature is revisiting some of this. This in the works now to change these?
There's a lot of discussion, and I'm really glad to see the participation of election officials who can educate the legislators about what it's like to actually have to carry these laws out.
I see. Extremely busy places.
It's a huge retail operation.
It
If you think about mobilizing 11,000 precincts around the state, 44,000 poll workers for a one-day event, and it's mostly citizens administering the election for other citizens. It's an amazing thing we call
some
democracy.
kind of party to plan, huh?
Yes, it is.
And it's all got to pretty much go off, and we're all looking to see who won that night.
Oh yeah.
And this next one I'm kind of near and dear to as a former school superintendent. Special elections. I could speak. Of course, personally, we've had many levies that we put on in February and August because of the special elections. I hear, I don't know how official it is, but that there is some talk that maybe that should be changed, that we should eliminate those because of the cost. Is that correct, or?
There's been a lot of discussion about that, and one of the things that we were a proponent of when I served as Secretary of State was to try doing the special elections by mail only.
I see.
Just people being mailed their ballots
Sure,
and
sure.
send them back in. Now there is discussion, and I don't know how it will all play out, about completely eliminating them, and that seems pretty unfortunate for school districts where we haven't really straightened out the whole school funding issues
No,
yet,
we haven't.
and yet they have to go to the levy sometimes repeatedly to be able to have the operating funds. So having 4 shots a year is good for the schools, and the point is the schools still have to pay for the levies anyways. One of the things that's being talked about is having the schools pay for the election up front, but the boards of elections have been pretty aggressive in trying to have the localities who are putting issues on the ballot actually pay for those elections.
Well, the issue with the schools is generally the collection of the money, if you're fortunate enough to pass your levy, will happen in the next year. So if you didn't get it in your first go around, it gives you that other shot at it without having to undergo mass layoffs and everything that goes on with trying to keep the schools open.
And we are talking about the education of our children.
What was the most challenging thing that you faced?
Probably the period of time when it was about 8 weeks before the election. There were actually death threats against my family and me, and I was guarded 24 hours a day by the Highway Patrol. And I asked myself, for election administration?
Oh
but
my gosh.
But if you look at elections in other countries, you will routinely hear about election workers being killed. And there's nothing more important to people than their freedom, and democracy is how we attain that. And so to me, it was worth it.
Comments made by John's guest on Law Talk are solely those of his guest and do not necessarily reflect the views of Celebrezze Zangi Community Legal Education Project. To view this show and others, go to www.czclep.org. In the Wadsworth area, a complete listing of dates and times of this broadcast, tune in to WCTV Channel 15 or log on to wadsworthcity.com and follow the links to WCTV. At CZClep, we're devoted to the education of today's legal issues. Fueled by the public's keen interest in our legal system and current events, CZClep is dedicated to the educational venues aimed at enhancing the understanding by all citizens, regardless of age, education, occupation, or wealth. A function of the Celebrezze Zangi Community Legal Education Project.